aide and secretary who are being held with him. Morsi is accused of breaking out of jail during Egypt's 2011 revolution, plus killing and adopting police officers. Now, if Egypt's interim government is casting Mohamed Morsi as a villain, the man who helped oust him from office, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, is being put on a pedestal. Ben Wiedemann reports that has got some people asking whether he will be willing to give up power.
It's not hard to understand who the man of the moment is in Egypt today, the man many Egyptians are dancing for. Defense Minister General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as the poster says, is the one we trust. It almost looks like a love affair.
Sisi, he's an honest man. We love him. We wish he can be our president.
Huge crowds, the Egyptian government claims tens of millions, turned out Friday to support his call for a mandate to fight terrorism. A thinly veiled code word for the Muslim Brotherhood and supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi, who have clashed violently with security forces since his ouster. The Egyptian military is playing on people's fears to rally support, worries activist and academic Rasha Abdallah.
Whatever it takes to secure us from terrorism, because terrorism is a terrorizing word. You know, you say the word and then things start happening. People give up their freedoms willingly because because you're telling them that you are going to save them.
Last Friday's mass rally in Tahrir looked like an explicit, enthusiastic endorsement of General Sisi. But does it mean Egypt is about to return to the dark days of dictatorship? Is there a danger that, out of the turbulence of the revolution emerges the strong man in uniform?
In theory, yes, of course, there is the possibility. But you need to bear in mind that for at least 6 months now, people have had it with Morsi and were wanting a way out. Sisi seemed to be the way out. They're jubilant now. But even if he was to come to power, Egyptians now need results. He would have to deliver. You see, the idea of the dictator who would stay there with no accountability is no longer possible.
Under Mubarak, protest in Egypt was muted. Since his overthrow, political turmoil, unrest, and demonstrations have become the norm. And until some form of viable, effective government emerges, that's the way it will be, says political organizer Ahmed Hawari.
Having no political system, having no due process, having no alternative than the streets, the people have taken to the streets and have the habit now to go to the streets. So the only insurance, and this is a very good thing actually, this is not a bad thing, the idea that people can at like this, if they do not approve of what you're doing, they're going to go and kick you out. This is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Just as Egyptians first toppled Hosni Mubarak and then Mohamed Morsi with a little help from the army, there's no guarantee that the next man at the helm of Egypt, whether he be civilian or soldier, Democrat or dictator, won't suffer the same fate. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Cairo.
Now, election officials are counting ballots in Mali after Sunday's presidential election. And it's the first since a military coup toppled the government 16 months ago. Critics say the election was rushed. Mali is recovering from the northern Islamist uprising this year after France intervened militarily and pushed the militants out of the north. Yet for more than 1 year, the West African country has been run by an unelected government, and whilst Mali is into the beginning of a new government, some women in the north of the country are still healing. They bear the invisible sears of the occupation of Islamist militants and Tuareg rebels last year. This report shares their story.
Aminata Touré was on her way to see her uncle when she was stopped by 2 men on a motorcycle. They raped her on the side of the road. They told me to stop, she says. I refused, but they were armed, and they said they would kill me if I didn't stop. One of them held my baby, while the other one took me into the bush. Then they did everything they wanted to do. Aminata is one of thousands of women that the UN has identified as victims of a campaign of sexual violence carried out by Islamist militants and Tuareg rebels in northern Mali last year. Their stories are only now being heard as French and Malian forces finally push rebel forces back. UNICEF reported the case of a 15-year-old girl raped by 10 men and other victims as young as 6 years old. Families have told horror stories that Islamist militants forced their daughters to marry at gunpoint, then raped and abandoned them. To protect their daughters, Nana Touré, a women's aid leader, helps smuggle teenage girls to the south of the country for safety. She explains, "We went from house to house to look for girls, to hide them or help them flee. We helped lots of girls to escape." The UN fears the number of victims from sexual violence may in fact be much higher, as women are afraid to report the rapes because of the shame they feel. Aid and government assistance is trickling back to North Mali, but it has not yet reached Aminata Touré. She says she tries to forget about the men who raped her, but she has this reminder: a newborn son, another child she struggles to care for, despite little help. Atika Schubert, CNN, London.
The Pope's trip to Brazil is over, but that hasn't stopped him from making headlines on the flight back to Rome. The pontiff spoke to reporters, telling them it's not a crime to be a gay. Quoting his words to be exact, the Pope really said, "Who am I to judge a gay person who worships God?" Pope Francis also spoke about women, calling for more prominent roles for them in the church, and this, according to the pontiff, excludes female ordination. Miguel Marquez looks back at the fourth international visit for the charismatic Pope.
He's a guy who knows how to work a crowd. The Pope, in native headdress, wearing a sombrero, even throwing his own skull cap to frenzied followers. Then there was Pope Francis stopping for a drink handed to him by a stranger in the crowd. Unheard of. Then there was the baby kissing, and kissing, and kissing. We knew Pope Francis was different. We didn't know how it would play outside the Vatican. Now we do.
Well, he's humble and he's simple, but he also appreciates deep things.
We now know his missionary message and no-nonsense advice is hitting a spot even with non-Catholics.
I never really looked at the Catholic Church before Pope Francis. It was just another church, really.
Is it the sort of organization you can see yourself joining?
It is. I actually am thinking about converting right now.
Music to Vatican ears. The church has long been losing ground to evangelical churches in Brazil. When Pope Francis visited a Rio slum whose people have largely left the Catholic Church, he prayed with children there, met families in their humble homes, and shook the hands of sanitation workers. We now know this is a man not just talking the talk about a church focused on the needs of the poor.
Senhor Jesus.
We cannot keep ourselves shut up in parishes, he says. We must go out through that door to seek and meet the people.
He's got a heart that really wants to be poor. He doesn't just preach about helping the poor.
We now know this is a 76-year-old man of seemingly boundless energy, his security racing to keep up, the Pope adding events at every turn, always a smile on his face, and his staff looking forward to the end. Vatican watcher John Allen says what struck him is watching Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio blossom into the people's pope.
You didn't see him smile in public. You didn't see him work rope lines. You didn't see him slap backs and kiss babies. It just wasn't the guy we knew. Now, in the papacy, this man has come alive. It's as if there was a light switch in him waiting to be flipped on.
He also sees the Pope playing the long game, building popular support, political capital for some heavy lifting and big changes to the church down the road.
If this wonderful impression the Pope has created, the impression of honesty and sincerity and transparency, if that doesn't in fairly short order translate into meaningful structural change, then it may well be the honeymoon will end and the hard questions will resurface.
Finally, there's one more thing we've learned. Nuns, they're just a little crazy for Pope Francis. They really, really love him. Miguel Marquez, CNN.
It's now time for the weather report by the Central Forecast Office.